Hey guys, welcome back. We're doing our, I think, fifth right now lecture for anatomy and physiology skeletal unit. We're going to go ahead and wrap up the skull today. Shouldn't take too terribly long to do that, and we'll try to keep it well within that 20-minute time frame we're shooting for. So let's jump right into it here. Left you guys off before with the temporal bone, a few terms to know, and here we sit at the sphenoid bone. So you want to look for purple. Not saying all your skulls are going to be color-coded this same way, but right here, this purple bone, that purple bone right there, right there, right there, and right there, that's a sphenoid bone. Now the whole bone is shaped like bat wings or butterfly wings, and you'll see that here in the view looking down from the top of the skull. It forms the posterior of the orbits, so the back of the eye socket. Leaves a little optic foramen or optic canal for the optic nerve to leave your eyeball and get back to your brain, which is kind of cool. It'll form a little bit of the lateral sides of the skull, which you can see in this diagram right here. A little bit of the anterior base of the skull, just barely right down in here. And then it contains some sinuses, which we just call sphenoid sinuses or sphenoidal sinus, and that is on your terms to know list. So the sphenoidal sinuses are right in here. Next term you need to know is the sella turcica. The sella turcica is the Turkish saddle, and that is this structure right here. And something sits in this saddle called a pituitary gland, a very, very important gland we call it the master gland of the body. And so the pituitary gland sits down in this sella turcica, and it is very safe sitting down in this little Turkish saddle. So, sphenoid bone, sphenoidal sinus, sella turcica, and you're in good shape there. So that's a sphenoid bone. A couple other views of it for you. We took the top half of the skull off, and we're looking straight down. Here you have the sphenoid bone, and this very characteristic bat wing or butterfly wing shape. This is the sella turcica right here. And there's a few other structures you could potentially recall. Do you remember what this guy right here is called? Hopefully you said foramen magnum. This bone right here would be the what? Hopefully you said occipital bone. This bone right here would be a parietal bone. This right here would be what bone? Hopefully you said temporal bone. And then you're all caught up from where we should be. So, other view, bottom of the skull, you can still see that sphenoid bone. But it is very tricky to see where the sphenoid bone ends, and a few of these others, like the palatine and the vomer, begin. And so that's why we do try to color code these when we can. Next bone. This, I don't know, what do you say? Dark pink. I think vomer might be pink, so ethmoid we'd have to call, I don't know, is it light purple or dark pink? Your call. I don't know. That's the ethmoid bone right here, this fellow. The ethmoid bone does have some rather small sinuses in it. Some important structures that you're going to need to know for the ethmoid bone include the crista galli, which I'm pretty sure is on your terms to know list. Yes, it is. This crista galli is this little bump right here on the ethmoid bone, and we attach the membrane that surrounds our brain to that bump. The other thing you're going to want to know is the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. That is right here, and it's all these little holes that run down into your nose. And those little holes are going to allow nerves to pass from your nose. What you smell, here's the air carrying scent into your nose. The air swirls around, contacts the nerves run up through these little holes called the cribriform plate, and just like that, we've got information to your brain about what you're smelling. So that's kind of cool. If you've ever played cribbage, that might help you with the cribriform plate. Cribbage is the game with the little pegs, and you try to get cards that add up to 15, pair for 2, that kind of stuff, and you move the pegs along the holes. Cribriform plate looks a lot like a cribbage board. Then we have the perpendicular plate. This guy right here, that's a perpendicular plate. It runs down perpendicular to form the top half of your nasal septum, the bony part of the nasal septum. You have a soft tissue part of the nasal septum as well. But the bony part of the nasal septum, quite a bit further in, is formed by the upper half is the ethmoid bone, and the lower half is the vomer. And so your nostrils are separated not only by flesh and connective tissue, but even by bone, all the way back as you inhale air. So middle concha. This one, we're not really getting a great view of it. Maybe we can get a better view. There we go. That's a little better. So same kind of purplish color. This middle concha is right here. And we have, that is part of this ethmoid bone right here. We also have a lower concha. We have a lower, a middle, and a superior nasal concha. And what these do is when you inhale air and you smell something, they cause the air in your nostrils to swirl. And the more swirling that air does, the more likely it is to contact these nerves up here and get you a better sense of what you're smelling. So when you're breathing, most of the air is going to pass down through here and through here. But if you really want to get a good sense of what something smells like and you sniff hard, you can actually force that air to swirl all the way up here. And you're going to end up getting a really good smell of what you're trying to get a scent of. If you're ever at somebody's place who's got a European mount or your place maybe of a deer that they've harvested, where they've just got that plain white skull with the antlers, they're gonna think you're kind of weird. But go ahead and take a look up that deer's nostrils, and the size of their nasal conchae will blow your mind. They're huge, so it doesn't really surprise you that deer have a pretty good sense of smell. And my relatives think I'm weird when I'm over there looking up their deer nostrils on their wall, but they're pretty cool when you get just the skull of that deer to see those nasal concha. So dogs also have a pretty big nasal concha. So compared to those guys, ours aren't great, but they get the job done. They make the air swirl. They give you a good scent, good smell of what's going on in the world around you. So that's kind of cool. So what else we have? Maxilla. Now we are onto facial bones. We are kind of leaving the cranium now. So this is no longer going to support your brain necessarily. This is going to be making up your face, the shape of your face. And the first bone that's going to do that is called the maxilla. So the maxilla has a palatine process, which is the roof of your mouth. And you can't get a good view of that here. Let's see if we can't get it here. This is better. Okay. That palatine process is right here. That's the palatine process of the maxilla. Okay. So where the maxilla meets the palatine bone is the palatine process of the maxilla. So that's one structure you're going to want to know. All this yellow right here, a little bit in the eye, underneath the nose, that, and a little bit framing the nose right here is your maxilla. It forms the upper part of your jaw, the floor of the orbits, and it contains a structure called the infraorbital foramen, which is right here, and its name to you at this point should be really logical. Infra, below, orbital, the orbit, foramen, hole or window. So it literally means the little hole below your orbit. And I'm pretty sure that's on here for facial bones. Yep, it is. It is on your skeletal terms to know list. So by all means, please know that. So there are some other structures you're going to want to know. This bone has very, very large sinuses in it. Right below your eyes, if you get a sinus infection, it's not uncommon to feel pressure on your cheeks, and that is coming from these very, very large sinuses. And that does not appear to be on your terms to know list. So you might be okay there. If you want a decent picture of them, though, page 163 in your book has a pretty good picture of some maxillary sinuses. So there you have that. Alveolar processes, alveolar arch, and dental alveoli are referring to these structures right here. Okay, we make this little arch for your teeth. Okay, the arch part itself, the top of the arch, is called the alveolar arch. The part that sticks down between your teeth right here, That's called the alveolar process. Okay, so altogether we can call those dental alveoli, and basically they just frame in your teeth. I don't think those are on your terms to know list. Let's see, maxilla. Nope, doesn't look like it. Cool. So maybe extra credit or something for those, but just know that the shape of your maxilla is very close to the shape of your teeth because it provides these little sockets for your teeth to sit in. So that's kind of cool. Some interesting applications for the maxilla. One disorder that some folks are born with is called a cleft palate, and basically where this maxilla is fused, some people don't get that fusion in their bones, and they have a cleft palate where they have a gap in their upper jaw. And the dense connective tissue will still bind these teeth in, but it doesn't look like the standard maxilla. And so that can be corrected with surgery. But yeah, no infraorbital foramen. Know what a maxilla is, and that's the bone that makes up your most of your cheeks and underneath of your nose. So next one, very tiny bone. This little blue guy right here, called the palatine bone. He forms the posterior part of the palate. You have a hard palate and a soft palate, and you can actually kind of feel this with your tongue or your finger or whatever, you know. You can push your tongue up against the roof of your mouth and feel that it's hard. And then if you work and push up with your tongue back, when you get back a ways, it'll actually become soft because that hard palate ends and just soft connective tissue, epithelium, you know, you can kind of feel where the hard palate ends and the soft palate begins just by taking your tongue and just pushing it on the roof of your mouth. So that's kind of cool, I guess. Gives you an idea of what sort of distance this covers, you know, in an actual body compared to just a PowerPoint. So that's kind of cool. So there's the palatine bone. It does form a little bit of the lateral walls of our nasal cavity. It forms a little bit of our posterior palate, but that's about it. So think palatine, palate, you know, that's where they get the name for palatine bone. And then the zygoma is this green bone right here. It forms the lateral side of the orbit and most of the structure that we would call your cheek. Let's see if we can see that orbit. Here we go. See the green right here? This lateral side of your eye, the outside of your eye socket, is that zygomatic bone. And then it runs along the cheek where it meets the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. And so there you have it. All together, we can call this whole thing the zygomatic arch. Or we can split it up and say zygomatic process of the temporal bone, temporal process of the zygomatic bone. So you name them for where they're going, and that can get a little bit confusing. Lacrimal bone is next. This little teeny tiny blue guy, because we apparently ran out of colors, is the lacrimal bone. Now we've already probably talked about this in class because we've talked about when you cry, your nose runs more. And that's because this little lacrimal bone contains a lacrimal duct. And when you cry, the tears are formed up here. They run across your eye. You blink. It pushes them to a lacrimal duct, and it drains out through your nose. So that's the lacrimal bone. Very, very teeny tiny little bone. It's anterior medial wall of the orbit, which just means the middle towards the front. And then that takes us to the nasal bone. This, again, blue because we're running out of colors. This nasal bone right here is the very bridge of your nose. You can feel on your nose where it's sort of soft and squishy, and you can push it around, and then you can feel up towards the top of your nose where it's hard, where your glasses might sit, for example, and that is the nasal bone. So when it comes to very logical names, I think the nasal bone might be our winner. So the vomer, this pink one right here, is the vomer, the base of the nasal septum, and it looks like, let's get a better view of it for you. Oh, right there. That's what it looks like. So from the front, it doesn't look like much. You know, all you saw was this little tiny line. But really, that vomer extends all the way up in this kind of shark fin sort of shape, all the way back to the sphenoid bone. So it does actually cover a lot of space. It just doesn't look like it because when you see it, all you see is this little teeny tiny line. but that is the vomer. And so there's another bone. Inferior nasal concha, we've already talked about those guys. Inferior means below. So we have inferior, we have middle, and up here we have a very, very small, super small superior nasal concha. And so fragile, it's shaped like a scroll. You already know what it does. It supports mucous membranes inside of your nose. And with that, we are done with the skull. So that's nice. You are going to have a couple skull labeling worksheets that you can do. I would also strongly recommend that you follow the links to the practice labeling websites, and they have games where you just practice labeling the skull and you drag and drop terms to the right location. And if it's right, the term stays. If it's wrong, it kicks it back out to the word bank. So those are great places to start. So that's all I have for you for the skull. Thank you for your time.